We're going to start our Proverbs 24, and we're going to pick up in verse number 1. Proverbs 24, and I don't know how far down we'll get today, but we'll see as we go along here. But Proverbs 24, start reading in verse number 1. Be not thou, be not thou envious against evil men, neither desire to be with them, for their heart studieth destruction, and their lips talk mischief. Through wisdom is an house builded, and by understanding it is established. And by knowledge shall the chambers be filled with all precious, pleasant riches. A wise man is strong, yea, a man of knowledge increases strength. For by wise counsel thou shalt make thy war, and in a multitude of counselors there is safety. All right, now we're just going to hone in today, and we're going to read probably all the way down, I think, to probably verse number 18. But verse number 5, I think, sums up a lot of what we're going to get taught in this chapter. And it's a wise man is strong. Yea, a man of knowledge increases strength. I couldn't help when I read that to think of my weightlifting days. I know this physique may... I try not to be braggadocious, so I cover all the muscle and fat so no one could see it. And so it's not to intimidate anyone. But I did for a while in high school, lift weights. I did. I was in Coach Sepulveda's class, and he was our weightlifting coach, and so it was a lot of fun. It was, I liked it because it wasn't so much competitive. You just competed against yourself. Whereas I'm not a big competitive sport person. I know you like football, and you like those competitive. My family loves competitive sports, and they watch it, but I've just never been that way. Just never really cared. I tried to watch. I watched boxing, as a kid, but I think I did that more to be with my dad, and just kind of do the thing with my dad. And so if I get into any type of competitive or get excited about anything competitive, it's a boxing match. In fact, I think there was a match going on Friday up in New York that was a big deal. A couple of Latino guys going to punch each other out up in New York, but for a Cinco de Mayo celebration is what it was. But so it was like a charity match or something for Cinco de Mayo, and I was kind of half interested in that, and then I found it was in New York, so I thought forget it, and let it be up there somewhere. I'm sure it was on pay-per-view or whatever they do nowadays, and but anyway, I just think of that. Matter of fact, there was one funny incident we had, and not in my weightlifting class, but we'll get to that in a minute. But we were doing an interview. Since we've been here, we're doing an interview to hire somebody to fill a position. This young lady came in to interview, and the typical interview questions. One of them is, so what is your strength? So the question was asked, and she looked kind of puzzled, and so we asked the question a second time. She looked puzzled. She goes, "You mean how much can I lift?" Well, no. She didn't get the job. And but we laughed, but I was kind of, as I was meditating and studying on this, I was putting out different parts of it to people around me just to get reactions and things. Not that they understood what I was doing, but and I mentioned that story to somebody, and they laughed because but when I got hired, they asked me how much I could actually lift. I'm like,
yeah, well, I mean, there's some job descriptions where they should ask if you can lift this much because of disabilities. Like if you have an injured knee or a damaged back that you can't simply lift, they need to know.
I suppose so. I mean, because we do lift. The only thing I think is we lift paper. I mean,
The guy that gets the paper order, those big boxes of paper,
oh yeah, they are. So I was just surprised because I laughed because of that interview where we asked what are expecting how much you lift, and everybody's like, no, like what are you good at, what are you not good at? But then I thought, but they really are asking what you can lift nowadays. I'm like, because again, we were acquired, so I never had to go through that question and answer things. So, And even when we were acquired and the big team came down from corporate, they never asked questions like that. So, so anyway, I just thought it was. But you're right. You're right. I mean, you still have to lift boxes of envelopes and boxes of paper and and shift desks around. That you. I had to teach someone the great. If I have a big enough lever, I can move the world kind of thing, because we couldn't get this thing to move. And I went and found a very large wrench that I used, stuck it underneath there and pivoted on a screwdriver. And I stuck it there and I just stepped on it. And the whole end of this huge thing that we couldn't get lifted up. But the fulcrum points and think, and it just came right off the ground. They were like, oh, I'm like, yeah. Haven't you ever heard if I had a big enough lever, I could move the world? And who was Socrates? No. Was it Socrates? Who was it said that? It was a Greek philosopher of some sort. But anyway, and they're like, no, I never heard of it. And I'm like, oh, yeah, well, there's the proof right there. Give me a big enough wrench and a screwdriver, and I can, no. But we were able to lift it up. But today's strength is not talking about physical strength, obviously. We're not talking about building up physical strength here. We're talking about spiritual strength, okay? And in fact, there's some beautiful verses that come up here in just a little bit, but we're talking about physical, not physical, but spiritual strength. A wise man is strong. Yeah, a man of knowledge increases strength. And he's not talking about you're wise, so you go out and you do, enter into one of these bodybuilding clubs. That's not what he's talking about here. He's talking about your spiritual strength. Why? Because you have to look at what's going on there. Be not envious against evil men, neither desire to be with them. For their heart studieth destruction, their lips talk of mischief. So why aren't you envious of them? Why don't you? Because all they think about is destroying things. Evil. That's what evil means. Evil means to plot destruction. Okay. We tend to think of evil as the devil, or something satanic in that. And I suppose there's truth in that. Because he is out to kill, steal, and destroy. And so he certainly fulfills the description. But let us not forget that at one point the scripture says, and God repented himself of the evil that he was going to do toward the children of Israel. So it means that God plotted. What did he do? Did he plot satanic things? No. He was plotting destruction in retribution for the idolatry of the children of Israel, because he had brought them out of the land of Egypt. Now they're building idols and saying, these be thy gods, O Israel, that brought us up out of the land of Egypt. And the one thing that God is always jealous and acts the severest against is idolatry. Okay, he tolerates a lot of our sins of the flesh, but the one thing he cannot tolerate is idolatry. How do you know that? How do you know that? Well, just read the Bible. I mean, he goes to severe lengths to punish idolatry. He will chasten sins of the flesh, but he will kick you out of the land when it comes to idolatry. Okay, he will shorten your life when it comes to idolatry. Okay, why? Because his name is jealous. So don't be envious against evil men. That means men who plot destruction or talk mischief with their lips. Why is that? Why? And don't even desire to be with them. Okay, this is one of the things. This is a wise man building his strength, increasing his strength. So here's God's instructions. One, well, don't be envious against evil men. You're not going to increase your spiritual strength by being envious of evil men or desiring to hang out with them. Now, again, we talked about, I think a couple of weeks ago, you hang out with people, you're going to end up being affected one way or the other. Even if you don't participate in their evil activities, okay, all that negativity, all that atmosphere that they create can have a very negative effect on you. Okay, think of Lot, whose righteous soul was vexed. I don't know that Lot necessarily participated in anything that was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah, but his soul was still affected. So we have to be very careful, because we don't want our soul to be affected by evil men. I don't know who it was, but here recently, I forget who it was. It was in a prayer meeting, I believe it was, where someone talked about the effect that a Christian can have on a group or an area that they're in, and we should. Okay, we should come in with that. And again, if you don't know, I'm not throwing tomatoes at you. I'm simply saying that it is possible for a single Christian who's walking close with the Lord to walk in and take over the atmosphere of an area and change the atmosphere from an evil atmosphere to a positive atmosphere. It is possible. And it's beneficial, especially if it's like at your work. Very beneficial to walk in and take over and change that attitude. Then we get down to 3 and 4. Through wisdom is an house builded, and by understanding it is established, and by knowledge shall the chambers be filled with all precious and pleasant fruit. So here we see wisdom not only building the house, but wisdom is filling the house. So this is how beneficial wisdom is. Okay? It not only can create it, but it can sustain it. Right? And so why are we being shown that? Well, because we want to increase our strength. We want to be strong. And how do we do that? By being wise. And here are some observations God is making through the one who penned this particular proverb, telling us how to do that. How do we do that? Don't be envious against the evil. Okay? Learn the value of wisdom, that wisdom cannot just start things, it can sustain things. Okay? Then we go down to verse 6. For by wise counsel shalt thou make thy ward, and a multitude of counselors of safety. So how else do I build my wisdom to build my strength? Well, counsel, wise counsel, right? You don't want to go to war with bad counsel. Okay? A lot of people in history have done that. Okay? We saw this thing not too long ago about Henry V. And when he was a bit of a playboy, and his father didn't want him to be king, so he passed over him and gave the kingdom to his younger brother. But unfortunately, his younger brother was killed in a battle that wasn't very well planned. Okay? And then the father died, and so guess who became king? Henry V. Okay? Now, he wasn't very well respected because he was a playboy prince. And so everybody knew in the kingdom, obviously England, everybody knew in the kingdom he was a playboy, so he wasn't very well respected. He wasn't very well respected by the neighboring kingdoms, particularly France. Okay? And all of a sudden, here comes that coronation party where all the various kingdoms and monarchs send gifts, to congratulate him on his ascension to the throne. And they're usually precious gifts, expensive items. It's how they did peace back then, It's how they did things. And so, but they got a gift from France, opened the box, and it was a ball. It was just a ball. Very cheap ball. Right? Yeah. You got it. And the cringe in the court when he opened it up, and the King of France sent him a ball. Like a toy ball. Yeah. Not a precious. This is like almost like a cricket ball. To me, it was like a cricket ball. The way they described it, it's a hard leather ball. It was like a toy. It was a child's toy. Well, all things went downhill from there because that was an insult, obviously. But it turns out now. So Henry goes to war, right? Henry actually takes France. He goes to war. Many died. Now, I have to salute Henry V on one thing. Anytime he would go to a battlefield, okay, and face off against another, he himself would come out and challenge the leader of the other army to single combat. And the winner took all and spare his men. Okay? Honestly, I have a lot of respect for that. Because a lot of kings sit on their horses and send everybody else in the battle on their behalf and slaughter them. And they're the last ones to get into battle. Okay? Whereas with Henry, it was always he'd ride out into the enemy's camp, challenge the head of the army to single combat to save the lives of the men. And made some kind of deal with him. If I win, for instance, he was met on the field of combat by the Dauphin, which is the French version of the Prince of Wales. He's the next in line for the throne. They call him the Dauphin. He met him on the field. He went and he challenged him. And he said, if I win, then upon your father's death, and by the way, it's a battle to the death, by the way, and then upon your father's death, I get the kingdom of France. If you win, my men go back to England and will never come back into France again. And, he made a deal. The Dauphin laughed at him and turned him down. Said, why would I do that? When I have all these men here. Very different attitude. Well, in the end of the day, the battle ensued. Henry won, and the Dauphin was killed. To make peace, Henry took the eldest daughter of the King of France as his wife. but he was king of France and king of England, and it was just that day and time. Okay, and but it was all a farce. His counselors wanted France, so they sent him the ball. The king of France knew nothing about it. The Dauphin knew nothing about it, which is why he acted the way he did when they met, because he didn't know what he was even doing there. He had never sent him anything, let alone a ball. Now, Henry had some generals that knew how to fight a battle, so he won the battles. But he should have never been in France in the first place, because France wasn't challenging him to anything. People just wanted land. And so they counseled him incorrectly. They counseled him according to, he discovered it in the end. After he had won, after he had a battle, and after he had killed the Dauphin, and after all this stuff, taken this wife back to England, and then he discovers it was all a ruse. Let us just say there were a lot of counselors that died that day when Henry found out. But when it talks about counsel, again, there was a lot of levels of counseling there. The biggest problem was the diplomatic counseling. That was the one that was wrong. He should have found other ways of finding out what was going on. But being the playboy that he was, he didn't have a lot of experience, and so he relied on those counsels, which they played him because they wanted to expand their own personal fortunes. And unfortunately, a lot of people died. Although, in Henry's defense, he challenged the Dauphin to hand-to-hand to the death, and he tried to spare the lives of not only his men, but the men of the Kingdom of France as well. And but they thought he was a joke in France because they couldn't understand what he was even doing there. Why was he so upset? What the heck had that done that made him so upset that he did this? They couldn't figure it out. In the end, they figured it out. Well, not the French, but he did. For by wise counsel, thou shalt make thy war again. So counsel. So what do I want? I value it. I don't hang out with it. I don't envy evil men or hang out with them. I understand the value of wisdom. I get counsel before I do things. All of these things increase my wisdom so that I can turn around and be a strong man. Verse 7 says, wisdom is too high for a fool. He openeth not his mouth at the gate. And he that deviseth to do evil shall be called a mischievous person. And the thought of foolishness is sin, and the scorner is an abomination to men. So suddenly we get a contrast here, like we did back in verse number 2 and not verse number 1, and that wisdom is too high for a fool. Now, for someone who is a fool, now, my personal opinion is when the Bible refers to a fool, it's one who said in his heart, there is no God. Well, I know it does say that, but I knew that you really get down to a foolish person is one who truly comes to the point where he says, there's no God. There's no right, there's no wrong. We just make it up as we go along. And this is absolutely contrary to what we're seeing here in the scripture and what the Bible reveals. But it's too high for a fool. It's too up there. It's too beyond his reach. And so therefore, what? He openeth not his mouth in the gate. Now, what's that reference to? Well, that's governing, because the leaders of the city sat in the gate. Okay? And when people had tough decisions and things, they went to the gate of the city and they presented their cause. Even if they're children, we read it last time in chapter 23, even their children, they could haul out to the gate because that's where they sat. They sat in the gate. Okay. And so, but a fool, okay, wisdom is too high for him. And by the way, a fool's always known. It always comes out. And generally it comes out by what they say. You figure out who they are by what they say. This is why the Bible says that even a fool is esteemed wise if he keeps his mouth shut. Okay? Because once he opens his mouth, we're going to know. Okay? And so it's always a valuable thing for someone who wants to seek after wisdom to learn to listen. Okay? One old proverb says you got 2 ears and 1 mouth. It means you should listen twice as much as you speak. Okay? That's kind of hard to do with some of our jobs. I know that. But at the same time, it's valuable even in our jobs to listen. Because sometimes if you don't listen carefully enough, then you misjudge what the actual situation is and your response will be off. I had a person like that a couple of weeks ago, and for whatever reason, I thought I understood what he was talking about, but I did not. I mean, it was close, and we were going back and forth, and I just couldn't figure out what his problem was and why his situation, because but I made a presumption based upon some language he was using, but it really wasn't what he was looking for. And generally speaking, I'm a little better to listen, not just to presume, but to actually listen and try to figure out what it is they really, really want, or what the real problem is. Because a lot of people don't know how to express what they want. And I made the mistake. I was busy, and I just made a presumption. And what could have taken 30 seconds to solve took days because of the fact that he was getting frustrated because I wasn't giving him the answers that he was looking for. And yet I was getting frustrated because I was giving him the answers I thought he was looking for, and it still wasn't the answers he wanted. And I'm like, what are you trying to do? And then it dawned on me, maybe what I assumed he wanted isn't what he wanted. And then I went, and now there was a lot of apologizing that has to go on because I have to express I misunderstood what he wanted, in order to give him what he needed. So listening is very, very important. But he opened the North Mountain's gate. He devises to do evil. Again, we have this evil and this mischievous stuff that's going on. And then it's the thought of foolishness is sin. Okay? The very thought of foolishness is sin. Not the actions of foolishness. Understand that. That can be sinful as well. But the very thought of foolishness is sin. And the scorner is an abomination to men. Now, scorner, if you read and study out through Scripture about a scorner, you find there's very little redemption available for scorners. Because once a person has become a scorner, it becomes very difficult to reason with them. It becomes very difficult to show them the error of their ways and get them to repent, if you will. I don't know, whatever level, whether it's spiritual or it's something on a more business or social level, when you get to that point, when you're dealing with someone who is a scorner, okay? You say, well, Pastor, what in the world's a scorner? Oh, you'll know. Someone critiquing something is not bad, okay? But you can always tell the difference between critiquing and scorning. A scorner leaves no room to be anything but what they accuse you of being. There is no pleasing them anymore. They have reached a level to where there is nothing you can do that's right. And even when you do it, even when you do everything within your power to rectify the situation, then all they do is go back and criticize the fact it took you so long to rectify the situation. There is still no satisfaction. Really, a scorner is someone who's really put themselves into their own prison. And there really is nothing you can do. They've got the key. They shut the door, lock the door from the inside. There's nothing you can do to take them out because they've put themselves inside there. Okay? And it's very, very difficult. I was having to deal with someone not too long ago, the same thing, where something didn't go right. It wasn't my fault. I did not do it, but we uncovered it. And so once we uncovered it, we jumped right in and we got it fixed. Okay? And so we sent the person word that this had been repaired. This had been fixed, And on a normal situation, it's a thank you, and you just kind of go on about your life, right? Not this guy. Oh, it only took you 25 days. Well, actually, it took us about 25 minutes because we just found out and we fixed it in about 25 minutes, literally. But instead of going, yay, it's fixed now he had more to complain about. There was just, and I really feel sorry for this fellow because he really is a scorner. But the problem with scorners is they lock themselves in and they keep the key inside the room with them. And there's nobody on the outside that can help because they have locked themselves into this imaginary room, okay, where no one outside that room has any redemption. You can't redeem yourself. You can't undo what you did. You can't prove yourself to them. You know what I'm saying? There is no making up for what happened. Even if you didn't do the original, because everybody's wrong, everybody's an idiot. You know what I'm saying? That's a scorner. Okay? And that's why the Bible just says when it comes to scorners, smite the scorner and the simple will be made wise. Cast out the scorner. Okay? Do a search on the word scorner in the scriptures, and there is no reason. Because why? Because they've got the key. It's like those crime shows where the murder is committed on the inside of a locked room, and there's nobody else in there but the murder victim. I mean, there's not. You know what I'm saying? There is a. They've locked themselves in this room of criticism, and there is no getting them out. And God says, "Well, here's how: cast them out, then smite them." Because there is no reasoning with them anymore. They've shut down that ability for you to reason with them, or for even God to reason with them. They're scorners. And that's why they're an abomination to men. Because you can't do anything for them or with them. Verse 10. If thou faint in the day of adversity, again, here's an observation. If thou faint in the day of adversity, thy strength is small. So if I faint when a challenge comes on, it means my spiritual strength is small. Okay? Doesn't mean it's not there. It just means it's small. Okay? Verse 11. If thou forbear to deliver those that are drawn unto death, and those that are ready to be slain, the sentence continues. If thou sayest, Behold, we knew it not, doth not he that pondereth the heart consider it? And he that keepeth thy soul, doth not he know it? And shall not he render to every man according to his work? So God goes on and says, now if you faint in the day of adversity, here's a good, your strength is small. Okay? I remember when we started pumping iron in high school. Of course, we're skinny as all get out. We were just little old things, you know. And a couple of guys, 3 guys and I decided you had to have a PE credit. There's so many PE credits to graduate. And by this time in high school, it wasn't just a general PE class anywhere. You had specific sports and things you could sign up for. So being all scrawny and skinny, we decided we'd sign up for weightlifting class. We should have gone into track or something like that, but we decided to go into weightlifting class. So in we go into weightlifting class, you know, and so I just remember this one particular, because you always start out with just the bar, because these were free weights. We had a few machines, but the coaches put you on the free weights. Okay, so you start out with just the bar, and a bar weighs about 45 pounds. Okay, and so you start out with just the bar. And you try to lift the bar, see if you can lift the bar, you know. That's always fun the first day. And now, I have to say we did well, except for one particular procedure. For some reason, we just couldn't get that. And that's when you're kind of in an incline and you press up. Okay. Now, amazingly, we could do bench presses and many other things, and we could put weights on them, and it was okay. But the most we could manage to pull off was just the bar on that other one. It was quite funny. And but we did this. Now, why? Why was it hard for us to do that? Because our strength was small. That's why. Because we were nerds. We didn't do things like that. You know, we didn't make those maneuvers, you know, in order to have the strength. The coach knew that. He always thought it was funny. And but nevertheless, there we'd be struggling to do that bar. And we got better throughout the time, you know, but never was that the most weight that we ever put on there, you know. We did end up putting some weights on the end of it, but it was never like what we could do when we bench pressed or we did other things, or curls or other things that we did, and which I can't remember the names of them now. But I just remember that one because that was always the most pathetic thing that we did. We just never, and it frustrated me because I couldn't understand how I could get everything else going and improve, but that one just barely ever improved. And when I would do it, and you know, and then you know how it is, you're pushing and you can't push anymore. And you're just like, why? Why can't I push anymore? It's just like everything comes to a halt. And even though the willpower is to go higher, you can't go any higher. You can't do any more. You can't do one more of these things. It's like, and you don't understand why. It's because your strength is small. You're just not strong enough to continue to do it. You know, which is why they give you spotters, obviously, because you can choke yourself if you're not careful. Or you do one of those emergency things where you tip it this way and tip it that way and drop the weights off the end of the bar. But again, when you're struggling with 45 pounds, dropping off the end of the bar isn't going to help because you're still back down to 45 pounds. But your strength is small. And God says if you faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small. But then he goes into this interesting example here. If you forbear to deliver them that are drawn unto death, and those that are ready to be slain. If thou sayest, Behold, and we read that question, and he says, So he goes into this, if you faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small. But then he goes over and says, but if you fail to deliver them, if you don't have the spiritual strength to deliver someone else, okay? It'd be like putting someone to spot for someone who has less strength than the person who's actually doing, you know what I'm saying? They never asked me to spot a guy who could actually really press some weight. You know why? Because I couldn't lift the weight. Do you know what I'm saying? And so if he got to that point where he himself just could not get it up anymore, okay, well, I wasn't going to take my skinny arms down there and grab it and get it up, you know. And so they never asked you to spot for someone like that because you have your limits on what you can lift. And I remember one time this guy was big and he could really put on the weight and really lift it. But it took two of us to spot for him, one on either side, and we'd have to grab the end of the and lift it up. We could take about half of what he could do, but we couldn't do the whole thing. And God is looking down here saying, he says, but if you fail to deliver them that are in trouble, again, this is a sign of weakness. That you don't have the spiritual strength to assist someone else. And if you say, well, I just didn't know. And God says, oh, come on, I know you knew. Okay? But you didn't bother to help. What does it mean? Weak spiritually. Verse 13. My son, eat thou honey, because it is good, and the honeycomb, which is sweet to thy taste. Sentence goes on. So shall the knowledge of wisdom be unto thy soul. When thou hast found it, there shall be a reward, and thy expectation shall not be cut off. What's he saying here? Now he uses this illustration of eating honey. Okay? Why is that? Because honey was their sugar. Honey was their sweetness. So what do? Okay, eat thou honey. Now, actually, I was reading this article one time, this coach of the swim team. Okay, and he was kind of going. It's an old article, an old Time Life article, very old article, but it was talking about him going through and him training these young men at this swim team, and right before the swim meet, you know what he would do? He'd set them down right before they went out, and he'd give them all great big spoons full of honey. Would. Big old tablespoon, big old, everybody got a big old spoonful of honey. And he did it to do what? Give them energy. Here's honey. Eat this honey in order to get some energy. And so that you have this boost of energy to do that. Now here, the Bible says, my son, eat thou honey because it is good, and the honeycomb, which is sweet to thy taste. But then look what he says. He's not really talking about eating, that you should go on a honey diet here. But so shall the knowledge of wisdom be unto thy soul. He's likening it unto knowledge. When thou hast found it, there shall be a reward, and thy expectation shall not be cut off. So what is he saying? He says, wisdom should be like honey. It should be sweet to thy taste. Be something that you desire to have. What did he call the promised land? The land flowing with what? Milk and honey. Right? It was the land flowing with milk and honey. Right? And so it was always an expression of something very good, something bountiful, something blessed. And so knowledge here should be bountiful and blessed. And that's why he said that there'll be a reward and your expectation will not be cut off. Verse 15, lay not wait, O wicked man, against the dwelling of the righteous. Spoil not his resting place. So here we have a warning against a wicked person that will set about to interfere with and to attack someone or spoil someone who is wise. We're going to look at verse 16, because again, the sentence doesn't stop there. For a just man falleth 7 times and rises up again, but the wicked shall fall into mischief. Now there's an oft-quoted verse, an oft-quoted idea. The just man shall rise or fall 7 times and rise again. What does that mean? All right, God, again, just trying to emphasize on strengthening your wisdom. Okay? So, because it's that God looks down and says, you're strong. So how do I do that? Well, much like you do anything else to gain strength. Okay? I mean, the very idea behind muscle building is that you push your muscles to their limit, which causes them to what? To tear. right? And then as they repair, that's when they get bigger. So you have to press it to the point where you're sore. Okay? When you're sore, it means you've done it, right? And a lot of my coworkers work out at gyms and stuff like that, and they come back in, and they'll go in the middle of the day, and then come back in, and they're like, they're sore the rest of the day. And I thought to myself, why do you do this to yourself? But anyway, but they prefer to do it in the middle of the day for some reason. They find it better to work out in the middle of the day than early in the morning or late in the afternoon. So they cut out in the middle of the day, and then they come back in and are nothing but sore the rest of the day. Why are they sore? Because they had a trainer, and the trainer pushed them to that limit. But you know what happens? It eventually repairs itself, and they get to come back and do more, right? Well, a just man falleth 7 times, but what? He rises up again. In other words, you can hit a just man with something that he wasn't expecting, and you can knock him down. Okay? Being strong in wisdom does not necessarily mean that you're never going to get hit by something unexpected that knocks you flat on your back. Okay? It doesn't mean that. You can fall. But you know what it does mean? You'll get back up. This is God's observation. He's not telling you to get back up. His observation is a just man will fall 7 times, which is a number of completion. It's not necessarily, okay, the 8th time he doesn't have to get back up. But he falls 7 times and what? Rises up again. Why? Because he has strength. But it doesn't mean he isn't going to get knocked down. Okay, some of the best boxers I ever saw got knocked down. But they got back up. And that's how they won. Because even getting knocked down, one of the first things they teach you in boxing is how to take a punch. Not how to give one. Because you throwing punches isn't really what's going to cause you to win. It's your ability to take a punch. That's what's going to cause you to win. Okay? And if you can't take a punch, then please don't take up the sport of boxing. Right? Because somebody's going to hit you. Okay? And you're going to see stars. I was teasing a lady one day that came to our church a long time ago, and she had polio. But she was just a sweet lady, but she was very physically, and so, you never thought about her having any bodily strength. But I was teasing her because I had gone out to a summer camp for kids, and I had come back and I was all sunburned, because this is what this skin does. It burns and peels. It doesn't go tan. And at best it may freckle, but it's not gonna go tan. So I was wearing a short sleeve shirt and I had a little bit of a peeling skin here. And it was bubbling up good and peeling off, And I was peeling it off and it was grossing her out. And she was like, stop it. That's gross. It's gross. And so I thought I'd just really wind her up. And so I said, oh, look at it. Oh, look at it peel off. It's like, stop it. I'm like, no, look at it peel off. Look at that. The next thing I know, I literally saw stars. And I was sitting down in the seat. And everybody was laughing. As I came to, everybody was laughing. She was laughing. And I'm like, whoa, what happened? I mean, I didn't see anything come. What happened? She had belted me. Never underestimate someone in a wheelchair. Those arms are strong. She looked all skinny and all weak and everything. Man, she can move herself in a wheelchair. And so when she popped me one, I didn't even see it coming. And I mean, I pulled myself out of that seat. I mean, everybody was just busting. She was wheezing, just laughing so hard at what she had done. I was like, whoo! Let me tell you something. Anytime in the future where she said, stop, I stopped. Because not only was those punches hard, they were fast, man. You didn't see them happen. Like, whoa, girl, we need to create some kind of a Paralympics for boxing for people in a wheelchair. Because, man, they're fast with them hands. But you got to take a punch. You got to be able to take a punch. But you get back up. So just man falleth 7 times, it rises up again. But the wicked, they fall into mischief. You know what that means? They don't rise up. Verse 17, rejoice not when thine enemy falleth. Let not thine heart be glad when he stumbleth, lest the Lord see it, and it displease him, and he turneth away his wrath from him. So here's another little thing where God looks down, and there's a wicked man who's looking for your fall. But if you fall, you rise up again. But the wicked fall, he won't rise up again. But look what God warns here. He says, but don't rejoice when they fall. We're talking about strength, building our strength. Don't rejoice when the wicked fall. Don't rejoice when the scorner is cast out. Don't rejoice when the scorner is. Don't rejoice when these people who lack wisdom and even may be your enemy, don't rejoice when they turn around and are punished or they stumble. Okay? Don't be glad in your heart. Really, they should have pity from us and not rejoicing. Because look what happens, verse 18, the Lord will see it. And it'll displease him, and then he'll turn away his wrath from him. So what does that mean? God says, hold on. I was going to deal with this guy over here, but if you're over here laughing, we're going to stop dealing with this, and I'm going to turn around and start dealing with you. Because you shouldn't be rejoicing that they're getting punished. You shouldn't be enjoying the fact that they're falling. No, not at all. You shouldn't rejoice at the fact that they pushed me to the point where I have to take judgment against them, because that's the worst thing you could ever want on anybody. And I will stop my punishment over here in order to turn around and deal with you. So we have to be careful. What are we talking about? We're talking about building strength. Spiritual strength. Building wisdom. And how do we do that? Okay, well, let's not be envious against the evil man or even hang out with them. Right? Let's appreciate the value of the power of wisdom, because it not only builds the house, right? It sustains it. Okay? And let's turn around and not just in that respect, okay? But let's turn around and let's get counsel when we do things. Let's understand that we don't always know everything there is to know. Or as they say at my place of work all the time, you don't know what you don't know. So you got to ask. Okay? And so you ask, you have to get wisdom. Why? And then what do? You make sure, okay, that you understand your own strength and that you can help others who are struggling. This is what he's talking about, forbearing them to deliver. We're building our strength, right? We make sure that we desire wisdom, okay? Like we would desire honey. I know a lot of people don't like the taste of honey, so they're like, blah, 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 blah. But it's actually the sweetness that we're referring to, that thing that causes us to want it. Like that's why God said it's a land flowing with milk and honey. It was desirous to have, okay? It was a bountiful place. And then what do we do to build our spiritual strength up? Well, the first thing we understand that just because God is exercising vengeance or wrath upon someone doesn't mean we're to stand over here and cheer. We have to learn very quickly that when God dispenses, right? It's the last thing God wants to do is to take out this. It's like we didn't actually sing it very well, but that chastisement is and punishment is the last thing God really wants to do. Okay? How many times did God bring, come now, let us reason, right? God would much rather sit down and have a chat with you than God would have to actually smite you. Okay? So if God has come to a level where he wants to smite someone, then what does that mean? It means they've gone past the point of reason. That's a bad thing. God's not happy with that. God's not pleased with this situation. Okay? And so we should not be pleased that God has had to come to that point. And when we see someone that is being chastised or stumbling, really our heart should go to the point of prayer for them. Our attitude ought to be that old proverb, Lord, if it weren't for you, there go I. It's only by the grace of God I am not in that position right now. This is spiritual strength. I realize that, it's just like being, okay, it's like those big guys coming into the room in the weightlifting class and us skinny little dudes are in there, right? It'd be like the fact that we're having a hard time over here and we're struggling and we're barely doing it, and they just sit over there and laugh at us, and, or they could be like some of the big guys that were in there who would come over to spot you and stand there and go, come on, you can do it, you can do it, you can push. And why? They didn't know you from Adam. No social engagement. You're with them. They're a completely different class of people. They were seniors and we were just like freshmen. But they come over there and you're skinny as a rail and they're like, push, come on. And they cheer you on. They saw no humor, no value in your failure. And it didn't make them stronger because you failed. And what we have to realize is when someone stumbles spiritually, someone fails spiritually, it doesn't make us stronger spiritually. That's not how we gain strength. Okay? I mean, about me bringing a kindergartner into weights class and then thinking I'm strong because I can lift more than him. And you'd be like, well, silly, no. He's yeah, I know. There's no comparison, is there? Just bringing in someone who is weaker than me to try and make myself look stronger doesn't really make me stronger, does it? And so rejoicing or bragging or gloating, probably the better word, over someone who can't perform as well as I, is really not of any benefit. And I think that's why God looks down and says, don't laugh. They stumbled spiritually, but I'll take care of you in a minute if you don't be quiet over there, because them being weak doesn't make you strong. You will gain your strength by following my steps on how to gain your strength. And nowhere in there is there pushing down someone else in order to make you stronger. It's not how it works. You're either going to strengthen. That's why I liked it, because we all had our individual charts. And when we would have our test day, okay, where it was no longer just working out, we had to go and we had to press things to see if we could press more than what we pressed last time. You know, it wasn't about whether or not you could press more than the guy in front of you or the guy behind you. You had to compare yourself to yourself. Were you pressing more than what you pressed the last time? Because even if you pressed more than the guy behind you in front of you, it didn't mean you improved. Because your strength wasn't going to be built because they got weaker. It was only going to be built when you were doing more than what you were doing last time. And that's spiritual strength too. Spiritual strength is, it doesn't matter. I'm not more spiritual because they're less spiritual. I'm more spiritual if I am literally more spiritual than I was yesterday or a year ago. You know, we don't do tests like that, but God does. God will come and give us a spiritual test. If you faint in the day of adversity, thy strength is small. Who do you think sins the day of adversity? God does. It's time to test for your own sake to realize where you're at spiritually. So I shall send you. But isn't that dangerous? No, because the just man falls 7 times and does what? Gets up. It's not dangerous because God knows if there's spiritual strength there, you'll get back up. Yeah, you may hurt yourself, but you'll get back up. So God will send it in there so you can see where you're at. Man, I hated it when we did those days. And the coach would come in with his level of expectation of what you should be able to do now and slap those extra weights on the end of that bar. And you're just like, ah. And then you had to stand there or sit there or lie there or whatever the case was and press that thing. You know what was worse? The leg presses. I found them much worse. For some reason, when I did those leg presses sometimes, and he would my legs would, you see the muscles on my legs just vibrate. You're like, oh, no. Like, oh no, I've got rubber bands. Well, that didn't help. And so because it just didn't look like I was going to press those things at all. And sometimes I couldn't. I'd be like, and I'd rise up in the seat. Coach would laugh because I turn all red in the face. But he knew what he was doing. He knew where he was pushing me. And then afterwards, I felt like my legs were like rubber bands because I'd overexerted my muscles. But that was the point. To test yourself. But you didn't get stronger because the guy next to you got weaker. You got stronger because you did more than you did last time. Or you could do. And if you didn't do more than you did last time, then it was time to go back and start building those muscles again. Because obviously you slacked off somewhere. So, spiritual strength is built by wisdom. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for this morning. And Father, we ask please now, as we bring our Bible study to a close, that you help us work on